from the Outpost. Shout out to the
Nice.
Outpost.
Thanks, Outpost. Yeah, that's awesome. That's good.
This episode is brought to you by Brandon Ball, broker owner of Dwelling Realty, Keller Williams, Northern Michigan. Are you looking to sell your home? Then look no further. When you list your home with Brandon Ball, you'll get a trusted advisor who will guide you through the entire selling process. With extensive knowledge of the local market, he'll help price your home competitively to attract the right buyers. And with proven marketed strategies, your home will be seen by the most qualified of buyers. With 17 years in the business, you'll have someone experienced who's on your side. Contact Brandon today to get started selling your home. 231-690-4981. That's 231-690-4981. Or Brandon at dwellingrealty.com. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's because she's not really good with dairy, so she would make this. And the whole process was also, by the way, just FYI, I'm going to do my very best not to say the F word on this. This is a kid show today. But anyways, one of my goals as I progress in age is to maybe dial back the cursing. But my years in the military really,
It's one of those things that it's just part of people's life, their demeanor, the way they get around, the way they communicate, especially if they've had a lot of influence of it. So
yeah, but then in all of my jobs that I've had or careers that I've had, and being around like a lot of dudes, guys tend to, after a while, you get to know each other, then the language really can get colorful.
You loosen up.
I mean, you must have had a pretty good amount. I mean, we went from talking about milk to this right away. But like when you were a corrections officer, the language had to be a little salty.
It at times got a little salty. Yeah, that was during a very busy portion of my life. But it's especially your coworkers were great. They didn't necessarily get too salty, but obviously the other people that you're taking care of could get a little salty.
I like how you say taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah. They, honestly, most of them were great. You didn't have a whole lot of issues. For me, it seems like anything or any, confrontations or fights or anything that happened, I wasn't there. I had very limited stuff that ever happened while I was there. So,
interesting. I had a conversation. I took my youngest daughter to the park this summer, and we were the only ones there. And then another dad and his little girl came to the park. And he looked really familiar, and this was it was the summer after I sold my business, and so he was like, "Hey, I think I know you," and I'm like, "Yeah." And, we got to chat. Anyways, he works at the prison at the Oaks, and he started kind of just letting me into that world a little bit. I was asking him questions. I tend to do that. Like, well, tell me about this. Like, what's going on up there or whatever. How has the prison changed? As I said, isn't that like a supermax, like the worst of the worst? And it's not anymore, but it used to be, I guess. And I'm like, how do you deal with like the dudes that are like never getting out? Mm-hmm. Like, aren't those the scariest? And he said, actually, those are the guys that are the easiest to deal with. Yeah, because they just are like, it's the ones
they accept it.
Yeah, it's the ones that are upset because they got like a 5-year sentence or a 7-year sentence, and they're trying to be tough because they know they're getting out or whatever. Mm-hmm. I found that really interesting.
Yeah, and honestly, I was in there. I worked there for really like 8 or 9 months. I mean, I wasn't. It was just. It had set up itself. Or
so
it
you
was
worked
kind
at the
of
Oaks?
No, it was at the Ludington jail. Yeah, I was just part-time, just trying to get my foot in the door. I knew a few people there, got myself in the door, and was just working every chance I could. I mean, anytime they'd call or needed somebody, I would come in and work. And it was a really crazy time because that was 2 of 3 jobs and just working a ton of hours. And so that portion of my life was just a blur.
You mentioned that the other day when we were chatting. How come you were working 3 jobs like that?
I think it kind of comes down to, when I was being brought up, and you kind of get this instilled in your head that, the man is supposed to be kind of like the breadwinner, or at least, you feel like you should be able to, you don't have to rely on anything else. Like, I can do this myself. And so we were young, we got married at, 22, started having kids at 25. And, it's just one of those things where I didn't want my wife to work. So I was working. I was making ice cream full time. That was my main job down at House Flavors. And she worked, 10 or 12 hour shifts there. And then we just weren't really making it. And so we decided, maybe I should look for something else, and maybe a change of pace. Maybe I should do something as a different career rather than just making ice cream. And so, it just transpired into applying for a job. They said, yeah, you can work part-time, get your foot in the door. Started doing that. And then, that wasn't even cutting it. So I started selling cell phones into the mix. So, yeah, it was pretty crazy. I would work 10 on, 5 off, 10 on, 2 off, for the schedule.
Yeah.
And it got a little crazy. So on those days and the 2 off and the 5 off, I was just filling it in, and afternoons I'd work, and you work 90 to 115 hours a week.
That's nuts, bro.
Yeah, for a while. It was not healthy. I'll tell you that. I'll never do it again. I mean, it was a really hard learning experience, because you had to figure out, I didn't want my wife Sarah to work, but man, that was not fun.
Is that because you wanted her to just take care of the kids?
Yeah. I mean, well, and we talked about it. I mean, it's like, one of those things where you just, you had these conversations before you get married.
Unpopular opinions, by the way, here.
What's that?
That, like, people are going to be like, well, you didn't want your wife to work?
Oh,
but,
yeah.
Hey, I mean, I'm on board with that. If the relationship, if the marriage is like, if one of the two in the relationship is like, I could totally stay home and do all this if you're cool with working.
Yeah, it wasn't like
that.
Yeah, it wasn't like me, saying, "Oh, you're gonna stay home."
Yeah.
It wasn't. We talked about this before we even got married, and how I wanted to be able to do that, and so we had that conversation, like, hey, what do you envision life in marriage? What's that look like to you? And so
that's great. I think a lot of people don't have that conversation.
Man, we had some tough ones. I mean, we had only been dating. We ended up dating for 4 years or whatever before we got married. But we had one night we had a super tough conversation, because she was brought up Catholic, I was brought up Methodist. I brought it up of like, hey, like, where are we taking our kid? Like, we didn't have kids. We weren't even married. But I was like, how do you see our life? And so we had some tough conversations about how that was going to transpire and what we saw for that. And so I think it's pretty important, though. I think I'm glad we hammered those things out ahead of time, because they would have reared their head later, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's super important for, just this morning, Betsy and I had, we tend to have long form conversations when nobody else in the house is up. We get up early and we talk about everything. From how we're feeling to where we see the day going to where the next year, 2 years. And it seems those are conversations that if you can have them open and honest with your partner, it can make a strong marriage.
Yeah. It's a common thread that when you hear people struggling, it most of the time is a lack of communication, right? It's like you forget to just talk to each other. We've done the same thing. You get in these ruts where you just, especially, you've got 3 kids, you get busy, right? And you start focusing on them so much. They're your life. They really are. But you're focusing on them so much that you forget. It started off with the 2 of you before they were ever around, and it's easy to get almost. I don't want to say you put kids in between you, but they kind of do, right? They kind of are in between, and so you got to reset and say, hey, we got, before kids, you're together. You have this huge chunk of time of having kids at home. Eventually, they're all going to be gone, and I'm starting to get that realization. It's like, holy smokes, I've got my oldest is driving, and I've got, they're getting out of that kid stage, and they're, with my 16-year-old, she's a young woman, and that freaks me out. It's like, holy cow.
I get to go through that part of it twice, really. My son is 21 and basically out of the house. He's figuring it out. He's doing his thing, and My oldest daughter's 19, so yeah, so I can reflect on what you just said there with turning into a woman. Like when she was around that 15, 16 years old, starting to drive. She's she's a lot like your dad, and I can appreciate that. And I know that she's really strong in mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you could just see the growth, like overnight. They're like, this isn't just your little person anymore. This is an adult.
Right. And for me, it really starts making you. It's exciting. It really is. I mean, it's healthy. It's good that you want them to grow up and have their own life, but it's such a cross to bear, of like reflection and looking back at like, am I doing this right? Like, am I taking the right steps? Are we doing the right things? I mean, they're your peeps, and you gotta. Yeah. So
I watched a thing from. Do you listen to Andrew Huberman at all, or taking it? He's a neuroscientist. Works for Stanford. He's got a podcast, and he talks a lot about, science has people on it or whatever, but it's kind of evolved over the years. He'll have other interesting guests that would draw a larger audience. And anyways, he posted a reel the other day, and I'm looking forward to actually watching the podcast. But the reel starts with him saying 50% of marriages end in divorce. And he's talking to this older gentleman. I might even slip this into to this portion of the podcast so people can watch or listen to what I'm trying to paraphrase here. I was talking to Betsy about it this morning, and I'm like, this is really kind of interesting because it didn't strike a nerve, but it was like kind of like an aha, because of all the conversations that we have, or much like the conversations that you've had with your wife, in that the person that he was interviewing said right after Andrew said 50% of marriages end in divorce, he said, that is true. And he goes, but I also wouldn't necessarily celebrate the marriages that have lasted 40, 50 years unless they have achieved their common vision, that they've allowed each other to grow and evolve and be able to thrive both individually and together in the relationship. And that was interesting because he was like, some people can just, for lack of better words, just kind of grind it out for a marriage until the very end. And one of them could be fulfilled and the other could have sacrificed everything for the other and feel a little, like they didn't get the opportunity to thrive.
Yeah.
They feel empty in the relationship. And I brought that up to Betsy, and I was like, this is exactly the main thing that I really appreciate about us is that we talk about everything. And there are days where I feel a little guilty because I tend to really find ways to fill my cup. And she's kind of going through this transition period where she's trying to figure out how to fill hers, right? Like, we want to fill our collective cup, but we also want to make sure that we fill our individual ones to go forward, which is why I think that open communication is paramount.
I mean, I envy you for that because, I know with our relationship, we can easily start getting in that mode of just day in and day out. How do we get through this day? Like, how do we get just last, and instead of like, hey, and I'm pointing at myself, I'm not great at like, hey, what's the guideline? What's the timeline? What do we got going on here? She's very good at remembering things and recall. I mean, it's almost freaky. I mean, she.
Well, that's in a lady's DNA.
I mean, she is. She is amazing at remembering stuff, and so she's the glue, right? I mean, she's what allows for us to not miss everything. Because if I was the one relying on, if they relied on me on making sure we're at places, we'd be late to everything, So, yeah, but it's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think, don't misunderstand. We've had many of months, if not years, where we were just kids and grinding, and kids and work, and it's you got to work at it. You really got to work at it.
Oh, I think it's every day. It really is. You have to want to. You gotta want to put in the effort. But man, it's a constant learn thing for me. It's I feel like the more that in as far as marriage and just family life, the more you learn, the more you realize how far behind you are. The more you realize you're like, man, I got a lot to learn. And so it's a constant learning, it's a constant growing, because if you're not, it's just like anything, right? If you're not working out or making a progression towards something, you've got a big goal you're working on. And if you're not always having that goal in mind, you're going to start going backwards. So it's the same thing, I think, in a lot of things. So it's big to have that end result of like you brought up. What's our goal? Where are we heading? How do we see this ending up? And be both pushing for that, because it's easy to get off track, So.
Do you, how do you take that kind of mindset with raising your daughters?
For me, it's a constant, like I said, it's a constant learning thing. But being brought up on a farm and having the constant responsibilities that you have on a farm, I think that ties into a lot of things. Everybody isn't brought up on a farm, and not everybody has that life as a kid. But for me, that was mine. We had a dairy farm. We had 500 acres. We had 300 cattle. In today's world, it's nothing.
That's a lot.
But 80s and 90s, back in the 80s and 90s, that was a pretty good size deal. And I got to see my parents grinding. I mean, they worked...
Farm life, dude.
They worked their butts off. And as a kid, I used to resent that, because I didn't feel like I got enough time, I didn't get the throwing the football. I didn't get the playing catch. We didn't go on family vacations. A family vacation was Dad needed a part, somewhere, and so we loaded up in the car and we drove there, right? Like that was that was the getting out, It just was, and I used to just be like, man, why can't we go do stuff? Why can't we? People want on spring break, we're going to work, and I used to hate that. But it really did instill really important things that makes you realize that, like, you do what you got to do, to get to that end result. What is your goal? My dad's goal, our farm started in 1876, with my great-great-grandpa. So their goal was make it, right? Like establish that 40 acres. Well, over the years, it went from 40 to 80 to 120 to 500. I mean, with my kids living on the farm, that's 6 generations that have been on that same land. That is huge for us. We really value that. And I think those type of values and things that are instilled in you as a kid really ties into how you raise your kids and how you raise your girls. In my case, I have 4 girls, 16, 12, 6, and 3. So we really don't want them to be lazy. Like, we don't want them to not be a fulfilling member of society. And I know my wife, she's always talking to him about that. Like, hey, you can't just be, right?
Right.
You need to have a goal. You need to push for something. We love sports. We love getting them involved in those, because those are things that are allowing you to strive towards something. And when it's the off season, do you just sit on the couch and do nothing? Well, you can, but you may not thrive at that or be the best you can be. So we're always pushing them to keep running. I know it stinks. I know you don't want to. Dad, I don't want to. Go do it. Like, you got to do it. So having those things that are pushing them and keeping them going is, you ask, like, what do you do? Like, how do you push them, or what's your thing? I think that's one thing for us that we really like them to do. I don't think everybody's an athlete. I don't think everybody.
I agree.
I don't think everybody's called to do that. But I think it's something you should be introduced to, at some point in your life, and you might learn. Maybe that's not my thing, right? But you might learn to keep your eyes open and look for other avenues. I have a few of my girls that are great artists. They're phenomenal. They have been just really pouring into that. And so we're trying to pour into them in that, buying them supplies, encouraging them. And so that might be an avenue that they go down, and it might be adjacent to doing athletics, but you got to let them go towards what they like, I think. So.
And the farm's still in operation?
Yeah. So it was always a dairy farm for years, and we. Growing up, that was our life, the hay, the corn, doing the whole thing, getting up early. Dairy is the 2 times a day, milk in the morning, milk in the afternoon. And as my dad was very busy, he unfortunately had a heart attack at 51. He got through it. It was, if you could pick a spot in your heart, the doctor said that was like the spot that you would want to have a heart attack if you could pick one. So it was kind of a time of reflection. My dad had to realize, do I have kids that want to take over the farm? Do I have kids that want a dairy farm? And he decided to sell the cattle. So after that heart attack, over the next few years, he just, it was a crazy day seeing a couple semis, double-decker semis come in and load up your family's living, right? All the dairy cows, that was weird. And then walking through the barns and seeing nothing.
Yeah.
It was eerie. It was super creepy. I mean, for months, I'd be walking around going, what is going on? I mean, it was super weird. And so, but yeah, we just don't have the cattle. So we still, my brother Jamie, he's really involved with day-to-day operations with my dad. My dad's 77 now, so he's not the spring chicken that he used to be, but he's still, he's doing the spraying, he's doing all that stuff, but him with my brother still do the hay and still do the corn. We've gotten into more with like oats and soybeans, kind of diversifying a little bit, but I wish with my work schedule I could do more on the farm, especially as I've gotten older. I actually like it. I as a kid, when I was 18.
Yeah, you don't want to do that stuff when you're a kid.
Yeah, when I was 18, my dad says, well, what do you think? As we're eating Cheerios, about what? Want to take over the farm? I was like, to me, it was dairy farm. That was what you were asking. But if I would have known that I know now, like, hey, maybe I could just crop farm, I'd probably be in a different spot, right, than what I currently am. But
you and your family, you're heavily involved in 4-H.
Yeah, big.
And your daughters are involved in, obviously.
Yep. Yeah, I've been involved with it for 36 years since I got in. My wife's been in the 4-H just as long. And you're in it before you're in it. Your family's doing it, and her and I are some of the younger ones of our family. And so we love the things that brings to the table. The things that it teaches you. It's so much more for our kids. Like the reason we really encourage them to be involved is because it teaches you so much more than just what people see. When you go and watch them leading the cow around, or tapping a pig around the ring. It teaches you responsibility. It teaches you the fact that you have to care for them daily, right? You can't just take a day off. So you're gonna be there day in and day out, working with them, guiding them, cleaning up after them, bedding them. If they get sick.
What animals are you doing?
We typically do hogs. We take a few to the pig show, and I grew up doing dairy just because we had made it a little easier, and so I'd take a whole bunch of those. My wife had done hogs too, but that's pretty much what we do for the most part.
And the girls are doing the feeding and the cleaning and
they do the whole gig. And the last couple years, I really have tried to, other than acquiring them and getting them there, I've really been trying to be more hands-off. Obviously, with the youngest two, I try to help them. But the older ones, if it's late and they forgot to do the chores or whatever, like, you guys got to get out there. I'm not doing it for you. I'm just so tired. Sorry, but those are the kind of things I think instill the fact of, like, as they get older, they're going to look back and go, they might not even think of it, but I think it's really going to make them realize that, like, hey, I got to go do this.
My good buddy Dylan, shout out to Dylan, grew up on a farm, into 4-H and all that, and you could see that today in him. You know, his work ethic and he just knows how to do, I almost said the S word. He just knows how to do stuff that I'm jealous of, you know, because I didn't kind of grow up that way. And you can really see that in people that kind of had that upbringing, you know. They just know how to work on things, they know how to fix stuff. He can, you know, build. Like yourself, you work with wood, you're a woodworker, and you do some amazing. Appreciate the chair you got me today. It's great. It's great for kids. I mean, like you said, you probably didn't enjoy it all that much growing up, but look at what you think of it now. Like, man, I wish I had time now to get out there and get after it.
Yeah,
and do those things. It's pretty cool, man.
Well, and you know, I don't know what got you. Your drive, you know, I don't know, you know, like you're saying, your buddy Dylan, he's got that. We're talking about farming too, and but you're super active. I mean, you do a lot of stuff, and you have done a lot of stuff. So obviously, there was something that set you in motion too. You know, that set that drive. I think there's things that do that for most people. There's something, you know, that's part of the foundational stuff. I think as a kid, and it's one of the burdens as a dad, you know, that you want to instill on your kids, is that you want to make sure that as they get older, they're not just lazy, right? I mean, you want them to be active. And so, trying to get them involved in those kind of things is a huge deal, I think. So. Yeah,
I don't think we're here just to sit around. You know, and I don't know where you know, my drive really comes from. If I'm being completely transparent, I just I enjoy what I enjoy, so that's kind of, you know, that's kind of how I take on life. Is just, if you can find it, you know, when people say just do your passion, and you'll be happy, as long as you just focus on it.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily believe that. I think that if you have something that you're really passionate about, it takes a lot of work to get there doing other things, you know, and we all got to make money. That's just kind of the way the world works. So, you know, finding ways, creative ways, or just through hard work, you know, giving yourself something that you can, so then you can focus on the passion or turn the hobby into something that's really something that you can just solely do, which I think is, it's pretty amazing if you can really focus on those things and get after it, you know. That's what I think sometimes with to kind of stay on this, like what gives people drive, because there are people that just don't have it, you know. They're just really content just kind of doing whatever just to kind of get through, and I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but it's not for me. But I grew up in a time where it really, my parents struggled, you know, like a lot of people struggle, you know, with money and work and whatever. And maybe that's where some of the drive comes from. But aside from that, the 80s and 90s when I grew up were a pretty easy time for a kid to grow up. And I wasn't living on a farm. I didn't have to do anything hard. I was able to just play sports in high school, and had a really good time doing that. And, you know, I think for me, I guess it was the military, because I had it really kind of good growing up in terms of there wasn't any like real hardship or anything that I saw, you know, other than the government cheese on the counter and stuff like that, you know. I mean, I do remember very vividly being in a grocery store and my mom having to use like WIC or food stamps, where they actually had to like sign the name and rip it off in front of people. I mean, that was tough. Probably way more tough for her than it was for me as a little kid. But when I went to college, I think I've told this story a few times, but when I went to college, I did a semester at Saginaw Valley. And, you know, it was the first time I ever left home. And I didn't like put myself in the college environment. I stayed off campus in an apartment with an older friend of mine who was going to U of M Flint, and it was just so unfulfilling. I was a little tiny fish in a big pond, couldn't make any friends, and maybe part of that was because I wasn't trying hard enough. But I was like, man, I was not doing well in school, and so I just happened upon a recruiting office in a mall, and I looked, and there was a Marine Corps, there was an Army, and there was an Air Force, and I don't know why I went into the Air Force one, but the first place I stopped and talked to, actually, I had a really good buddy of mine in high school, Drew. Shout out to Drew, because I think he does watch these. Who, when we were seniors in high school, had a meeting at his house with the Air Force recruiter.
Okay.
And them guys were relentless on trying to get, after I left that meeting, he signed up. I mean, his dad was in the military, high ranking, and so he was on that path. And I had a few other buddies that went in the service right after high school. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that. Okay, long story, let's make it short. I went in and talked to these guys, and it was 4 or 5 months later I was getting sworn in. And I don't have a memory of like asking my parents if they thought it was cool. I signed up and then said, hey, by the way, I signed up for the Air Force. So in like 2 months, I'm going to Detroit getting sworn in, and I'm getting on a bus, and I'm out.
Gone.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, I really think it was the military that squared me away, and was, I had to. It was a lot like athletics in the beginning. You just were getting fit, getting strong.
Yep.
Working your way through the weeks of boot camp, and when I signed up, I had a vision of what I wanted to do, and that's what I did. And yeah.
That's super cool.
And then I take all that with me now. I mean, I still get up super early. I'm still into staying fit and healthy as much as I can, and I use that kind of framework to do all the things that I do. Even if it just looks like I'm just having a good old time, in my mind I'm like, okay, check. Let's do that.
Well, that's huge. That's a big deal. And that's a crazy story that you just kind of up and did it, because that's pretty gutsy,
Well, I saw a meme the other day. I have it. I was going to post it on my timeline, but sometimes I'm like, some people are going to get rubbed the wrong way. But it was like, it showed the boats landing in World War II as they're coming up on the shore. And on the top it said, like, you're 20 years old or 21 years old, and you're complaining because your break wasn't long enough at Starbucks, but your grandfather, boom,
right?
Yeah. This was a different, men were different back in the day.
Oh, man.
Could you imagine? I can't imagine today any young person 18 to 20 some years old being, number one, told you're being drafted.
Yeah.
Or you have to go.
Yeah.
And the odds of you getting, not coming back are pretty high.
Yeah.
Extremely
high.
And men back then were like, I'm signing up.
Yeah, I noticed that. I've always had such high respect for any branch of military, and I think it probably stems from that. Like, my family wasn't, right. Like, I mean, none of my siblings, none of my my parents, grandparents, none of them, we were farmed, right. So that was our contribution, was like, we were farmers. So when I saw people in uniform, I was like, and I think that's why I have a lot of respect for police officers and firefighters and just people that are willing to give of themselves for a bigger cause, right? I mean, protecting the country is kind of a big deal, right? So that's huge to me. But looking at, like, my grandpa, like I had a customer of mine who came in, and I was halfway, done with the process, and he realized he kept looking at my name, and he goes, Wood, what's your grandpa's name? I said, Merle. Merle Wood? Are you kidding me? And this is an old timer. I mean, he was an old guy. He goes, Merle, oh man, that was the toughest dude. Are you kidding me? That's your grandpa? And he started reflecting on him playing football. He was just a hard-nosed, like, I didn't know him in that part of his life,
No.
And so I was just, like, soaking it up, going, oh my gosh, you knew my grandpa? that's crazy. And he was like, my grandpa was like a major upperclassman, you know, so he would have been a really young guy watching football. He goes, oh, he was like a pulling guard. He was a level guy. He just built like a brick house. I was like, what? But I'd see my grandpa, you know, we'd be grinding corn as a kid. It'd be 100 degrees out, you know, and he's out there in his overalls and it's, you know, his stuff, grinding corn, filling up 100-pound feed bags. He'd grab 100 pounds on each side as an older guy, pick him up.
That's that farmer strong,
Man,
dude.
And I'd go over there with a half a bag. I couldn't even lift it up.
Farmers are built different,
I was
dude.
like, you are a tank. And you just watch that, and you're just like, I'm never messing with my grandpa, you know, like.
It's so interesting because, like, the grandkids never really know what their grandparents were really like.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, they see a mellowed version of it.
They see the absolute mellowed version of it.
Yeah.
You know, like our parents, it's like, okay, your grandma and grandpa now are Nana and Papa or whatever, but you are not the people that raised me.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? My grandparents, my dad's mom and dad, moved up to Manistee. I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I feel it was like somewhere in the late, well, it was right after the Detroit riots. Okay. So my grandfather was on the Rouge Fire Department, fought in those riots.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was like, we're done, we're moving. They had a hunting camp up in Kalkaska that the family would always go up to for a long time, and they were kind of looking for a business to buy. Okay. You know, and there was a gas station up there. We're thinking about that. They did a little, like, well drilling, you know, that they invested in, and they were like, well, maybe, because Kalkaska back in the day, dude, there was a lot of oil up there. Okay. Not so much anymore, but so they thought about opening up or buying this like little gas station or whatever, and they came across, I don't know if you know, like if you remember the Moonlight Motel and Marina that was here in Manistee, which is over by the ship, the condos and the boats.
I remember hearing about it.
All gone. Now it's all gone. But anyhow, they bought that. So they sold the house down in Rouge and moved the family up here. So I think my dad was maybe 12 and Catholic. They went to the Catholic school here in Manistee, and you know, my grandfather. And prior to that, when he married my grandmother, I mean, they were like 19, 20 years old. And he went to Korea, Korean War vet. So yeah, all this wild stuff that you don't really know until later when you're having conversations. Yeah. And I can remember as a kid, like I always wanted to work at the motel. I had an older cousin who was like mowing lawns there, and he'd work on the docks and at the marina and stuff, and fill gas up in the boats and go out on charter. And I was just a few years younger than him, you know. I'm like, I could not wait to get down there and work. Yeah. So I would spend my entire summers down there when I was real little. And I can remember, we had a little tiny like coffee shop, and what it was just this little area, this little part of the motel that in the back was where we did all the laundry, but up front there was a counter, and they had, you know, one of the bun, like you just get coffee out of the big thing, and then they would have these cake donuts that they would get from like Cisco or Gordon's back in the day or whatever supplier. But people would sit in there, drink coffee, smoke cigarettes, chew the rag. The police department was, the state police was like across the street. So sometimes the troopers would come down, and we knew all these guys, and it was so great. Cool. But that's so awesome. Here I go again with these long talks. I'm trying to interview you, and I'm talking. But anyways, I love it. I remember sitting in there and just, you know, sucking in all the cigarette smoke as a kid. And my grandfather and my grandmother would be in there, and it'd be early, and Grandpa would be like thinking about what he's going to work on for the day. You know, because that was their job. They lived there and they worked that. Kind of like a farm, right? And they lived there and they worked there 24/7. Yep. You don't take days off. Yep. And he's like, well, I got to go and work on this dock or whatever. And he would just get up and walk out. And then that was the day that I started working there, because my grandmother was like, he's not going to ask you for help. So you best just go. Yep. So then I went, and that's where you start learning the swear words. drop a
Yeah.
wrench in the water, and yeah, oh, Grandpa, I had no idea, you know. But
Yeah.
then as you get older and
Yeah.
you're around those older people and you're listening to the stories, you're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea,
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
no idea.
It's so funny to hear you say that because it was a couple Thanksgivings ago, my brothers and I, you get done with dinner, you're kind of sitting there, kind of talking about life, and you're reflecting on like how you got started in that and stories and how that gets your mind going. We were sitting there and sitting around the table, all my brothers, with the exception of my sister, all of us are sitting there, and I don't know how I got started, but we went down this rabbit hole of stories that Mom and Dad didn't know. Oh, man.
Never a good thing.
I mean, we started telling, I don't know who got it started, but we started talking about like injuries or things that we almost had happen that you don't tell Mom and Dad because, you're going to get it, right? So like you're going to get an earful. So you just, don't say anything. And we're talking about, stuff that happened with the silos and stuff that happened out in the fields. And, my brother's like, you guys, like looking at my mom and dad like they might have known. You remember me falling out of the first floor down to the second floor? And then I fell into that hay right next to the fork. And they were like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys knew that, right? And they're like, no. I mean, you almost got skewered, by a fork. And, just crazy memories start coming up. And, I had some really close calls, on the farm where you're like, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, man. I mean, but those are stories that you look back on. It's funny when like the older people too. Well, nobody got hurt.
Yeah. Well, some of them we got hurt.
Some of them got hurt.
Some of them we got hurt, and some of them were close. Like, I'll tell a quick story.
Yeah.
But
you got all day.
we were running down this rabbit hole, and I said, this one time so I'll kind of put some groundwork here, I guess, a little bit, but a silo, vertical thing that stores silage. When you're filling it, you have this unloader that's called. It gets raised to the top, and then you filling it in, and it fills up the whole silo. And as it's like getting filled, it kind of does this, right? It's going up and down and getting compressed and heating and stuff. Well, you get to the top, and you have to unload it now, right? You did your job. You worked all summer. You got the sucker full. And to get it unloading, you have to like lower this unloader down, level it off, and it's got an auger, right? 220 power to run this thing. It's not a 110 and an outlet, right? This is like it's got a big motor on it and stuff. And but a lot of times when you're getting it started, it'll clog up before it really starts working right. It had clogged up, right? So you have to climb up 80 feet to the top of the silo. And my dad's like, hey, get up there and get it taken care of, So I climb up there, and I start trying to fix it, right? And so in my mind, as a young man, my dad said, go fix it, right? So I run up there, and I just start, I'm taking a shovel or a fork in my hands, and I'm digging right down by the auger, right? Because it's packed. And I'm digging, and it's all wet silage. And I'm like, man, this is tough. And I'm trying to dig through it, and all of a sudden, I'm like, I'm right next to this auger. What if somebody turns this thing on, right? So me thinking ahead, I'm like, I'm not getting chopped up by an auger today. So I go and undo this giant, it's like a twisty 220 volt thing, right? Throw it into the to the side and just keep unloading. So even if somebody turned it on, I'm thinking like, I'm not going to get hurt. I'm unloading it, or I'm digging in there, and I'm noticing that like my body's hurting, like it's starting to hurt, and I'm like, am I just getting like weak? What's going on? And then so I keep digging, and as I'm getting into this more and more of the wet silage, like I'm realizing my hands are like folding in, right?
I think I know what's going on.
And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? And then I remember like this really distinct, my calves were hurt, like it felt like somebody was just putting a stake in the back of my calf. And I'm like, what is going on? And all of a sudden it all starts like clicking together, and I look over, and I see that 220 power, I've been burying it with wet silage, and it's now surging electricity through the silage, and it's like literally making my hands and my body like fold in on itself. When I'm putting this all together, I'm going,
You're electrocuting yourself, dude.
yeah. Wow. And I go, I gotta get out of this, Well, I can't really stand up. I can't really move.
This is a wild story, dude.
I'm trying to get over to the side. There's like a little tiny cement lip at the top of an 80-foot silo. It's where the dome goes down to the top, right? It's really small. And I'm trying to get over to the edge to get out of it. I get myself to the edge.
Gosh, this is creeping me out.
I climb up to the edge, and as soon as I get all of my body like up to this little tiny edge, my body just goes to like relief, but pain. Like it was just like, now I'm like, it's like letting go, right? All of this, I didn't know, this is a reflection story, right?
Yeah.
Now I'm on the opposite side of where I need to be. My fork that you use to get everything out was down in there, so I'm like trying to process all this. I'm scooting along the edge, it's got pigeon poop everywhere, and you're trying to just scoot along the side of it. I get over, I finally flick up the fork, and I start uncovering this thing, the 220 thing, and I get it all uncovered. This took a while. Like, this was a process. Meanwhile, this whole time, I'm not fixing the problem, right? I mean, I'm dealing with trying not to die up here, right? I mean, essentially. I get to the point where I get it all uncovered. I'll try to speed up the story. I get all the way over to the side, right? So now I have it out. I'm standing on the silage, and I'm kind of just like, whew, that was crazy. And I hear my dad. He's got a wrench, right, 80 feet down. Boom, 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 boom. And the bottom of the silo. Hey, what are you doing? Right? And I'm like, I am not telling my dad this, right? I buried this thing. I did it, right? I'm like, almost done. So I just run over there and I start like double time. I get it all done. I get down, and my dad's looking at me like, what are you doing up there? Why did it take so long? I'm like, it was really bad.
You never told him.
I'm telling him at Thanksgiving, right? And my dad's looking across the table going, he went through so many things, and there was so many day in and day out stuff that happened that I don't know that he necessarily is going to like recall that day, right? And he didn't. Like, he's like, I don't, there was a common theme, like, as we're like telling these stories. I don't remember that. I don't remember that, right? And he probably doesn't, because it was a long time ago. But as we're telling these stories, and oh yeah, that's great, and then like, it was just, you don't realize like how you could have gotten, like, it could have turned out a lot worse, and so like you're reflecting on being with your grandpa and being out at the docks and the cussing and the working on stuff. You hit your finger with a hammer, and I mean, but you're watching them, right? And you're learning so much from them, and you learn things like, hey, he was grinding, right? He was out there, he's working there, he's doing his thing, he's making ends meet, doing whatever he's got to do. And if that's dig up a dock and everything. You mentioned that it was your grandma that said, he's not going to ask you.
He's not going to ask you, better go.
My mom did the same thing to me. Hey, you need to go help your dad. He's not going to ask for your help. It's like having the forethought, right? Like, you need to know he needs help and be willing to help. And so those kind of things all, I think, set that baseline groundwork of like, hey, you don't have to always be asked, right? Like, you can just have enough brain power to say, like, maybe I should go help, and be willing to help. And I think that ties into like 4-H and things like that, because people are always willing to help out. They're always willing to be there as an extra hand. And that's, when stuff, crap hits the fan, people are always willing to step up,
Yeah.
And the people that have that groundwork, that have that baseline, and I think that's huge. That's
What is that? What is that about fathers and sons? I'm the same way. Like, I'm just like, I'm gonna go just do this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. I as far as like the willing to just do it,
Yeah, but like there's almost an inability. I have an inability to ask.
Oh, yeah.
Like my kids, hey, come on, do this.
Yeah.
Come help me with
Yeah.
this. I'm just like, I'll just go do it.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know. I think you just, as a dad, as a father, you kind of just assume you just do it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what that is, but it's
It's like
definitely a common thread.
Working at the motel, when I finally was able to do stuff on my own, like the mowing the lawn, there's that hill on 31 that comes down there. Like right now, it's not mowed. Like they just kind of trim up on 31 and kind of. I had to push mow that on an angle as a kid, right? Push mow that entire thing, and it would take a good 2 hours or more to get it all mowed, and then go mow the marina. And my grandmother gave me $20 a week, and I could not wait to get that $20.
Right.
Never saved any of it, but I mean, we would work as kids like, all day long on maintenance of that place. $20 a week.
Yep.
Well, it's always been $20. That's what you get.
Yeah.
I never had anything like what your story happened to me, but if we're going to tell stories, this was amazing. Because even when I think back on the story now, I'm like, oh my gosh, could have lost my grandfather. But it's a funny story. So there was a beach there. So there was two sides. There was like 1 through 10 or 11 on this side, and then you had like 12 through 21 on this side of rooms. And there was a courtyard, and it went right down to Manistee Lake. And there was a beach, sandy beach. There was a dock that went off so we could run and jump and dive into the water.
Nice.
You couldn't ask for, I mean, for me, growing up there was paradise.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And we had a raft, and it was chained to a boulder at the bottom of a lake there. And one day, the chain came off, and the raft was just kind of afloat. So Grandpa was like, let's go get this squared away. So got in a boat, little boat, went out to the dock, or the raft. I think I was on, this is when the memory gets foggy, I was either still in the boat or I was on the raft. But he had to dive down, get the chain, and connect it back to the boulder, right? And he was, to me, he was 100 feet tall, right? He was like 6'4", maybe.
Wow,
really
big,
tall dude.
Yeah, big dude.
And a big boy.
Okay.
I mean, a real big boy.
Okay.
And a great swimmer, by the way. And so he got out of the boat and swam down.
Wow.
And then he came up, and then he went back down. And then he came up, and then he went back down. And then the third time he went down, he didn't come up. And I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting. And I'm like, to me, it was an eternity, bro. And then I was young, 11, 12, and I see lips come out of the water. Lips, bro. And then back down. And I'm like, what is going on? And he was down there forever. And then he comes up out of the water. He gets it. The chain somehow got like connected to his leg, his boot, or his pants. So he was stuck. And he had just enough room to put his lips out of the water to take a breath to go back down. Never talked about it, bro.
You didn't even talk about it?
No. Well, he wasn't a talker. Anyways.
Yeah, that generation.
Yeah, they were quiet. They grew up in the Depression. I mean, my grandmother would save pencils down as far as they would go.
Oh my gosh.
Loose paper.
Yeah, same.
She did this quirky thing that I'll never forget, but it was her way of, like, obviously there were no cell phones, no computers or anything like that. So she would make notes on these pieces of paper, and she would use, like, all the way down to the end. She would use an entire sheet. But the notes, she would just set down on the ground inside their living quarters. They'd just be on the floor. And she would and she'd pick it up. She'd go, oh, gotta do that. Put it back down, because she wasn't going to get to it right away. She would just leave it on the floor. She'd have these little notes on the floor. And I was always like, what is this about?
Kidding.
Yeah, every little thing.
Yeah.
But just saving everything, using everything.
Yep. Bread bags, right? Any container, Cool Whip container, all that stuff. After my grandparents passed away, we went up to the attic. We're cleaning out the house, working on stuff. Entire attic, dude. The entire attic full of bread bags, Cool Whip containers.
Yeah. I mean, that's northern Michigan. If you don't have a pile of Cool Whip containers in your house for leftovers, you're not from Michigan.
Right. That's you are 100% correct. It's for some reason it's definitely a northern Michigan thing, but they were of the Depression era, right? I mean, they were of the time where you don't just throw stuff away. I remember my mom would send my grandpa. Thankfully, it was a big blessing. My grandpa and grandma on my dad's side lived right across the road from the farm. We were half a mile away from my mom and dad's house. Their house was, and so I was like, I always say I was like kind of raised by my grandparents because they dropped me off in the morning at 3:00, right? I mean, they just leave the door open. You didn't lock the door back then. So you just walk in, they throw me on the couch. I'd be sleeping. I'd wake up and Grandma would be like, "You ready for breakfast?"
Oh yeah.
And she'd be. I didn't realize how like awesome it was having eggs and bacon and just like that was just their normal thing. And they would send. Sometimes Mom would be like, "Oh, I got some leftovers," so she'd send it in a Tupperware or whatever. I'd use it and I'd go to throw it away, and Grandma would see me throw it away. Right? My grandma was like a saint. Like she wouldn't say anything, but I'd go back over there to throw something else away. It was gone. She was over there washing it. Like she just went and took it and was like, all right, we'll use this. Like, we don't throw those away. I was like, yeah.
You ever had a fried lard sandwich?
No.
Dude, that was one of those
I had
things.
fried bologna.
That was one of those things. But I'd come into the little house and Grandpa would be frying up hunks of lard, and he would get like a little hoagie bun, toast it, put the lard on the hoagie with 2 slices of tomato and some cheese and mayonnaise.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it was a cardiac event waiting to happen. Right? I think he had like 3 or 4 heart attacks. It's just like, what are you doing, bro?
Right.
But they were good.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sure it was delicious.
That's how it. Yeah. Learned to love Braunschweiger.
Ooh, nice. Yeah, I remember buddies of mine that we'd be playing out in the tree fort. My grandma was a saint. We'd be playing out in the tree fort, building the tree fort. Like I guess that was part of the building stuff. And my grandma, God bless her, she'd come outside like the very stereotypical, like billboard grandma, right? Like she'd come outside, she'd have like a little tray. She'd have lemonade. She'd have fresh made cinnamon rolls or sandwiches or whatever. She'd bring them outside. You guys hungry? And my friends, we'd all run down there, scarf it down. But they remember that. Like I have buddies of mine who are like, your grandma was amazing.
Guaranteed she didn't do that for your dad.
No. No. But those kind of memories, man, like are just so cool. Just so awesome. And you just you don't even know how good you had it, you didn't know. I was building forts in the haymow, and I was the youngest, and so my brothers always give me crap, and they're like, "Oh, you don't even know what it's like to work, right? You don't even know, right?"
That's a brother thing.
Because they were throwing 1,000 square bales a day, and or whatever. They're ripped and they're working hard and they're doing the thing. They tend to forget after they were all gone.
You were the only one left.
I was the only one there. So, but that's a whole nother story. But those memories are just awesome. Yeah, I wouldn't trade it.
Betts grew up on a farm.
Yeah.
Farm's still in operation. Dude, they mostly just lease some of the land now, but it's a centennial farm.
Same. Yeah.
It's which is
a
really
big
cool.
deal. Big deal. Yeah.
And her brothers and her, they grew up with the hay and doing all that work, much like what you're talking about. It was never a dairy farm for them. Mm-hmm. Although I might be speaking out of church a little bit here, but I feel like that there was some cattle there.
Okay.
At years and years before them. Mm-hmm. I think it was her grandparents' farm at one point. But yeah, so they all work. Like they can't not stop. Mm-hmm. Right? But it's funny because the same things that you're talking about with your grandparents, I see that in my youngest. The education that she's getting out at that farm, as subtle as it is, she gets to kind of do her own thing when she's out there, but her 2 nephews come out, and right now they're the best of pals. Mm-hmm. And they just they do all kinds of stuff. They're building things out in the woods. They're playing by the creek. I'm super fortunate and blessed that she's got that, because a lot of kids don't have that.
Yeah.
So she's getting something out of these younger years with her grandparents that, I'm jealous of, because it's a real amazing thing for her, and they're the best grandparents. I mean, they want all the kids there as much as, and Betsy always laughs. She's like, "You were never like that when I was growing up." That's why I feel like I'm going to be the best grandfather when I get blessed with grandkids, because it's so nice to just be like, you can do whatever you want.
Right, yeah.
Fun.
Just go have fun. Yeah, go do your thing. Well, a great saying that I absolutely love, and you're talking about how she's learning, right? Like learning all these fundamental things. And a really cool saying I've always loved is you need to learn more so that you can earn more so you can return more.
Yeah.
Right? And like, so just learning's a big basis of that, whether it's the fundamental stuff you learn as a kid from your grandparents, if you're, lucky enough to know them or be by them, as a kid. And then obviously from your parents, you're going to learn good and bad things, right? And we all are good or bad, but if you learn those baseline things to where you realize that you get into a career, you do something where you can start earning some income, also very important. But at the end of the day, you start to realize that just earning that stuff, there's a bigger thing, it's a bigger calling, so that you can return some of those blessings you've been bestowed, right, back to the things that are important to you. And everybody's got their own thing, right? Everybody has their own thing, but it's a big deal.
Yeah, giving is a big part of what we try to do financially. I shouldn't say try, we do. We try to keep as much of it local, and I should say almost all of our giving is local, because I think when you can help your local community, it's a real positive thing, and we're not flashy with it, but I think it is nice to know that if you can give back financially. Locally, it's you can see the rewards from it, and I think that's really great. And even if you can't, if you don't have the financial means to do that, there are other ways with volunteering.
I was just going to say, the thing that we all have a limited hourglass of is time, right? Yeah. And to me, if somebody's willing to donate or volunteer or give time, that's expensive, right? I mean, your time is expensive. So my dad, in amongst doing the farming and all that, he was also for like 21 or 22 years the director of Historic White Pine Village. So we volunteered a lot. And at first, you kind of get volunteered, right?
Sure.
Your parents are like, hey, we need your help. But as you get older, you start wanting to volunteer and help out. And, man, when you start seeing, like, my dad, I mean, I could go into a whole bunch of stuff that my dad did out there, and phenomenal. I mean, he just built a lot up there. But he also saw the power in getting, everybody's like, always wants to talk about money, money.
Yeah.
You can get grants, you can do all these different things to get money, get people to donate. It's harder to get people to commit to time, but he saw the value in it. So he would invest his time in getting people to invest their time. And before you know it, you get a huge directory of volunteers and people that are like, hey, we just want to come help. We want to, because he invested the time to get it going. And man, that's huge, especially in the community, right? I mean, everybody wants, what am I getting out of it, right?
Yeah.
What am I going to get paid? Where's my money? Well, I think you get to a point where you're like, big deal to help.
If you can give time away for something, I wouldn't, if I say give time away, but what you get in return, it's way more rewarding.
Yeah.
My son, I love the fact he's a real beautiful soul, and I don't know how it got started, but he started playing chess, learning how to play chess. And we had played a little bit when we were younger together, and he's way better than I am, but I knew the concept and how to move the pieces, so I kind of taught him a little bit. And anyways, I don't know how it really took off for him. There was a moment in time where he made his way to the senior center here, I can't remember where he was playing. I think it was his first year at West Shore. There was a group that was playing chess, and they were just older dudes, and they were playing on campus. And he asked to play one day, and they said, "Sure, come on in." And then they were like, "We play over at the senior center on these days or whatever." So one day he just went, and he loved it. He would just be like, "Hey, tomorrow at like 1 o'clock, I gotta go to the senior centers. We're playing chess." And these were all like elderly people. This is where, this group of people goes to the senior center to be around other people, right? And
it's a
they
social
would
event.
call him, "Are you coming today?" And he'd go and play and hang out with all these.
That is awesome.
I thought that was just. He didn't look at it as volunteering, but again, he could at 18 years old or 19 years old, he could have been doing so many other things.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Well, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I got to go for a couple hours to the senior center and play chess." And then one of these guys, this is one of those things where like you don't expect from like your kid, but it wasn't shocking to me, but just because of how good of a human he is. But he's like, I'm just going to throw a name out. I'm going to say Phil. It's probably not the name of the guy, but he's like, "Hey, so I got to take this guy Phil to a doctor's appointment. He needs a ride." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." So he went, picked him up, took him to the doctor's appointment. It turned out that this Phil needed a colonoscopy, right? And so he asked Trent, my son, if he could take him to this doctor's appointment or whatever when it comes up.
Yeah.
And so Trent was like, "Yeah, sure." So like a couple weeks later, we were planning something on like a Tuesday or Thursday, and Trent was like, I don't know if I can do that. I have to pick Phil up at like 8 in the morning and take him to this doctor's appointment. So he took him to his colonoscopy, waited in the waiting room for him to finish, and then he gets wheeled out in the wheelchair, and then Trent like helps him in his vehicle and like takes him back to his house. And I'm like, and he doesn't even know the guy really, other than like he met him at the senior center, and Trent was like, "It's the least I could do. Give him a hand. Needed a ride." And I'm like, man, if I've done anything in raising you,
I was just gonna
this
say,
is great, because a lot of kids would be like, "Nah, dog."
Right. Yeah. A, I'm not taking you. B, not taking you for a colonoscopy, right?
Yeah.
Like they all like, it's like all off-putting, like, no, I'm cooler than that, I was just gonna say, dude, that is a huge reflection on you and raising a kid, right? I think for me, showing, I think that's a reflection on your love in your relationship with him, because I think one of our big driving forces as a dad, as a father, as a kind of like, I don't want this taken the wrong way, but like head of the household, right? Like somebody who's like, supposed to be kind of helping lead the family with your wife. I think showing love is a big thing, right? And I think that's huge, like that he's doing that kind of stuff, because that just shows how much love you poured into him, and he's got enough, right, that he can help out and do stuff. He might not look at it, like it's a love thing, but that's how I look at that. That's big. That's a big deal. So kudos to you and raising an awesome kid. That's sweet.
So what do you do now outside of your marriage with like your how do you pick people to circle around yourself, like friends and other men and stuff like that?
That's been an interesting thing, and something I've been reflecting on a lot, especially when you get in. For me, when I got into my 30s, that was kind of like man, I'm 30, and then you get into your 40s and you're like, man, I'm 40, right? And like all these thoughts of like, I'm halfway to the finish line, and if something doesn't crazy happen ahead of time, right? Like, you do a lot of self-reflection. You do
I think at 40, I mean, that is when men are like, whoa. You go through a lot of changes in your 20s.
Yeah.
Your 20s can be, for a lot of men, can be like just a wild time.
Yeah.
Like you're just like going to school, you're finding your first job, you're hanging out, you're partying or whatever.
Yeah.
And then by the time you're in your 30s, if you found the right partner, you're getting ready to raise a family and blah, 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 blah. And then, the kids get older, you turn into that 40-year-old, and when I was younger, I thought 40 was so old.
I know.
And now, to kind of dovetail on what you just said, at 40, I was like, it's a big time for reflection, introspectively, and trying to, like, what is the meaning of it all?
Yeah. Well, and the thing that that's kind of been the big reoccurring thing, and I think there's a higher power, there's something more like helping me reflect on these things, is that, I got into my 40s and I'm like, I've had these friends from the time you're a kid, right? And I think you have these different you have friends, and you have like super close friends, and you have like acquaintances, people just kind of come and go. And as I've gotten older, I've realized how just incredibly important your close friends are. You don't need a lot of them. You need good ones, right? And man, I've been lucky to have some close friends. But it's interesting to me, and it's funny that you bring that up, is that I've been reflecting on the fact that, like, as I've gotten into my middle age, you start to recognize that, like, you need more, like, interaction, and I need to be able to, like, unload some stuff, right? And I think for a guy, you can kind of feel like, oh, you're getting soft, or, guys are always like, I gotta be tough. I can handle it. Yeah, I can handle this. But I think as you get, maybe that's more of a 20-30 thing, at least for me. As I've gotten into my 40s, I'm like, man, I gotta be able to, like, unload some stuff. And so I have, in my 40s, really, late 30s, acquired some new friends, like guys that I never hung out with as a kid. Some of them have been through business, through work, and then I have created friendships there. Some of my closest friends right now are still my childhood friends that are forever friends, but I've acquired some new friends that have been huge, like major. We kind of have this really awesome co-mentoring kind of relationship where if I need to unload something on them, they are like truly listening to you, right? Like really listening to what you got going on, and then vice versa. I've got some buddies that are going through some stuff, like heavy stuff, and they're like, man, and they don't necessarily have to come up like, hey man, I really need to talk, right? It's not really like that. It's like we just talk, and then it gets real deep sometimes. Man, I live for that now, like I need that. And luckily I was raised in a Christian home, and I was raised in a really religious surroundings. And these guys later in my life are good dudes, like they're good morals, good values, And so a lot of times, even when I'm like, this is crazy, and I'm going through stuff, a lot of times they're like this level of like, hey, have you prayed about it? What have you done any just quiet times? Like, where are you at with that stuff? And I'm like, it's like, it just makes you go, man, I need that, So it's a really big deal to have those guys in my life right now, because for me, I'm realizing that I want to surround myself with guys that are like-minded, right? But also that challenge me.
Yeah.
And I used to get really uncomfortable when people kind of call you out on stuff, but I'm realizing now that those guys, they too want to be called out, not in a jerk kind of way, but like in a reflective kind of way, right? Like, hey, where are you at? Like, you need to check yourself right now. These thoughts you're having, you're not going down a good road, right? And when you start having guys that can kind of, be that life check, it's big. It's a big deal. And they want it too, but I need that. I need that guys that keep you in check, keep you focused, help you on your dreams. Like, where are you going with this? Where do you think this is going to take you? Giving you a bigger perspective. Some of them have gone through stuff that I haven't gone through, and some of the guys ask me questions because I've done stuff or gone through stuff that they haven't, right? And man, that's been a big deal for me. I don't know about for you.
No, I'm gonna mirror exactly everything that you're saying. Look, man, it's they say you are who you hang out with, you are who your friends are, you are who you associate with, and it's super important that if you have a particular moral compass, that you surround yourself with people that kind of align with that compass. And I've learned, and I've said this before, I say it to people that I'm close to, that you have to have you have to be good at pruning. Sometimes there's people in your life that, for whatever reason, you just gotta and move on from that, and kind of bring yourself into other relationships that really help lift you up and lift up others. I mean, I see it with, like, when you look at like younger kids and who they're kind of running with or whatever, and you're like, yeah, but I know that you're trying to create something here, but it might be doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
And to your point, as I've gotten older, like the really great friends that I had when I was younger, we've all kind of gone off and done our own things, and you meet new people, you make new friendships, you form new bonds. But the friendships that I have today are the best friendships that I've ever had in my life, because we're all at similar points in our life, and we're all trying to do similarly the same things, different degrees. Like I said, one of my best buddies, he's not married, doesn't have any kids, he's on a path, he's doing great stuff, he embodies the things that I want to be a part of. So just because he's not married or has a family or anything like that doesn't mean he's any less of a friend.
Right.
And I have another really good buddy that's kind of on the same path that I'm on, and we're different ages or whatever. But to the point being, I've found my tribe, and I will do anything to keep that tribe together. And I think that's really important when you're trying to, because I have a ton of people that I know. Like you said, acquaintances. Yeah. I have a very small group of friends. Yeah. And keeping that real close to the vest.
Yeah, I think that's super important, and I think you, just as you get older, start to realize how important they are. You mentioned pruning. That's a phenomenal word for progression in life, because I think the people that are not pushing themselves to go where you want to go, all they're going to do is pull you back, right? They're not going to let you go, and sometimes you got to let it go. And I'm not the kind of guy, and I hope I haven't been, but I don't feel like I'm the kind of guy that's like, you know what? You're dragging me down, and just like this big dramatic, like, we are done, right? Like, it's not really my thing. But maybe, you're not, you're not hanging out.
You can be subtle.
You're not hanging out. You're just not, you're not calling them, right? Like, these guys I'm talking about, they'll call me just like, hey, how's it going? Good. Hey, thanks for calling. What's up? Oh, nothing. And you had these conversations like there's nothing tied to it, right?
Yeah.
There's no like, what do you need, right? Or the guy that always calls and like, what do you want, right? What's up? What's going on? You need me for something, right? It's not that. They're truly checking up on you. Like, hey, how's life? How's it going? What do you got going on? Just, all right, cool, awesome, man. I was just checking up on you. Oh,
yeah.
Cool. And when you have those relationships and you have those conversations, you're like, that was cool. He's just checking up on me.
I got a buddy, Tom, who is, I think we've been friends really for maybe a couple of years now. But really, I look to him. Like, so when I talk about like how young people need mentors, us guys that are a little bit older need mentors too. Tom's not much older than me, a couple of years older than me or whatever. But I do look to him out of anybody if I'm needing advice or something. And it's a dude thing, but I don't go, hey, I need some advice.
Right.
We'll just start talking, and then I'll ask some questions or whatever, and then he always gives me the kind of feedback that I'm looking for.
Yep. I've had youth pastors growing up that were great mentors for me. I've had dads of people that were my age that now I hang out with. I mean, I'm their kid's age, but shout out to Bob. He's
Bob?
Yeah, he's one of the guys. Like, I don't really ask his opinion, but I look at his life, right? And I look at like stuff that he's done and things that he does, and it's a great reflection of what a dad should be. He's involved in their lives. He pours love on them. He wasn't afraid to discipline, right? And I think there's a place for it, right? You need to know right and wrong. You need to know that life isn't just, you can just kind of, everything's okay, right? Everything's fine. Like, as you get older, you realize, like, there's things that are good, and there's things that are bad. There's paths you can go down that are bad. There's paths that can really be encouraging, enlightening, and enlightenment for your life. So I'll look at his life a lot of times, and we'll just have conversations, and they're very lighthearted for the most part. But I can look at his life and go, man, he's done some really good things. And that's a really important thing in the mentoring realm that just helps with you getting to that next level, getting to that goal, right? Like getting to where you're going. And it's very important to have those relationships as you get older, but also those, I think, older mentors too. But
yeah, and I think that's lacking. It's lacking today, the mentoring.
Mm-hmm.
I think kids are doing less and less as far as like I had coaches that I looked up to, so there's like a category of like young athletes that are getting that, but aside from that, that's why I wanted to talk to you about 4-H and stuff because getting your kids kind of involved at a younger age in some of these things. Like, I've never been the parent, and Betsy's the same way, where we don't like push. Like, as much as I wanted a 2-guard who could drop down some threes, none of my kids are into that kind of stuff.
Right.
And that's fine. Pushing a kid into something is just going to fill them with resentment. But if you can kind of guide them towards some of these things so that they can interact with other young people and see somebody with authority kind of guide them through because what you're taught at a young age with some of the stuff that's what they perceive as difficult, it really helps shape you into the kind of person that you eventually be. Because let's be real, like, I never wanted to listen to anything my dad said, but I listened to everything my grandfather said. Or, like you said, you have a relationship with one of your buddy's fathers that, those relationships, because it's somebody else kind of guiding that, or helping light that torch for you. And the hope is that those people are positive influences, because, there are some that aren't, but
sure.
And then it's being okay as a parent to be like, yeah, okay, listen, but you're not going to listen to me, but if you listen to him or whatever, because they're on the same wavelength that you are, then by all means.
Yeah, and our kids, and I was the same way, like you said, you don't listen to your dad, but you listen to your grandpa. My relationship with my 2 sets of grandpa were way different.
Same here.
My one grandpa was like the guy that was the football player. He was not the sharing guy. He was very strict and barely smiled and just hard nosed. My other grandpa was like a green thumb, and like you could go to him and ask him to help you build something, and he'd drop everything and just go help you. So it had very dynamic differences there. But I think you look at your kids, I would assume, same with my kids, and sometimes you look like you're saying stuff to them, it's just on deaf ears, and you're just like, you don't know what you're talking about. And, but yet you hear them talking to somebody else, and they're like, oh, and they're very attentive, and you're like, what's going on here? But I think it's just nature. And I think as long as you have that baseline and for me, we're active in the church, and I've been currently helping with sound, and we try to go as often as we can. And I think getting them involved with some of those type of things too, like with youth groups and, like you said, like minds, surrounding themselves with good people and good values and good morals, that you can help them when they're struggling. They're going to have a bigger field of people, right? Like you said earlier, it's a village, right? You got to build that village up. And I think that's one of our responsibilities as a dad. You know, it's like you got to help, and it's not easy. I mean, we've had challenges with our girls and like getting them to open up and be accepting of other people. Well, you have to, and you got to get that village bigger. So maybe they won't share something with me. I hope they do, but maybe they won't. But maybe they'll share it with somebody who I still want them around. So
Yeah. You're almost there, dude, when it's time to let them go.
yeah,
You know, the hardest thing for me was letting my son go off and do his own thing. You know, my 19-year-old daughter, like I said, she's a lot like me. So it's still going to be hard, but that you, like for you and I guess I can't speak for you, but like I reflect on the mistakes that I made or the choices that I made to get to become the person that I am today. You can't not allow that to happen with your kids. You know, once you let them go, you're not done parenting.
Right.
The worry, like I lay in bed at night going, okay, what's going on? Where are they at? What are they doing? What are they doing tomorrow? You know, but they're gone. And it's wild today because it's so accessible. I can just open my computer, open up my phone, I can talk to them, text them, whatever.
Yeah.
But when we were growing up,
no,
you know, when it much like to go all the way back to kind of the beginning when I told my parents, by the way, I signed up for the Air Force. Like, you know, we didn't have that constant contact.
yeah,
You know,
and when you went away,
and
you went away.
Gone, dog.
right?
Yeah.
You were gone.
Gone.
Yeah. So that's why when you were saying that, I'm like, that's wild. Like that is wild to me, and I'm such a like a connection guy. Like I need connections that it's really hard for me to just let go. Like that, when you said that like put like fear in me. Like I couldn't have done that. I didn't do it. I mean, I didn't have that like, I'm out of here, right? So I give you kudos. Like that's crazy to me that you just had that like, yeah, I can be gone for a year. Like, I don't care. I mean, maybe you cared. Right? I can't speak for you either. But, like, maybe you had that connection, too. But you're also willing to do it, right? I mean, that's wild to me.
It was the most pivotal 6 months of my life, because when I was so like clueless at what I was walking into. And I think some people that were in the military that listen or watch this I'm sure that they would agree, unless they just like had a military family and they knew what they were getting into or whatever. But I mean, I went in with zero expectations. I mean, other than I thought, you know, what's the worst that could happen? I've got to do a bunch of push-ups and I have to run.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But so I got my hair cut high and tight before I left. I was wearing blue jeans and a white T-shirt, and I felt like I was Tom Cruise, you know. And that's the first thing that was pointed out. Well, look at this guy. Who does he think he is, right? I'm going to go off on the rails here, but I got to tell this story. So I know that you won't know, so I'll try to explain this a little bit. At least in the Air Force, I can't speak for the other branches, but when it's time for chow, like you're just like I'm in a flight. We were flight 331, and so I can't remember how many were in the flight, but so every time breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you would march your way outside in front of the entrance to the chow hall.
Okay.
And in order to go in and eat, there was an appointed member of that flight. You know, one of these airmen was called the chow runner. And they would have to march in. There's a whole series of like ways to get in and all that. And then there was a superiority table. Basically, it was up a little bit, and on it were the drill instructors for each flight, because we would all go in, you know, in lines together. The chow runner would have to go and present himself and say that flight 331 is here for chow or whatever. I don't know. I wasn't the chow runner. I don't know everything they had to say, but it was the opportunity for those drill instructors to dress that person down, like just belittle the hell out of them, right? Ask them questions, because part of it was we had these big, thick books that had like all the military regulations and everything in it, some history, and we had to learn it. So like every day we were reading it or whatever, because at the end of boot camp you had to take a test, and if you failed the test, then you have to go back a couple weeks and just kind of start over again. So they would ask him questions based on some of the stuff that was in there. And so we get pulled in on the bus, day one. We come into Lackland Air Force Base, the training facility. We're on the bus. There is a kid on the bus who had, now this is 1998, folks, but he had like purple hair. He had an earring. He was wearing like a band T-shirt, you know. It looked like he was just like, what? How bad could it be? This is before we got our heads shaved and all that. I mean, it's the morning of, we pull in.
Okay.
And we're all standing up. And, of course, the drill instructors come out, and every other word's the F word, JC this, JC that, look at this, look at that. And I hear one of them say, Jesus H. Christ, look what we have here.
Yep.
It looks like we have a chow runner. Because they could not wait to destroy him.
Oh, man.
And so I'm like, well, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But so it starts
And what's
with,
a chow runner?
I have no idea what's going to happen, to just complete chaos, and everybody's like, what's going on? So these are all, this was the beginning stages of what completely transformed me mentally as a person, as a man, you know.
Yeah.
Like, it's not for everybody. I had a little staff senior airman, Sanchez or something like that. She was a little Spanish lady, was my drill instructor, right? I mean, when I'm saying she's this tall, she's this tall, so I'm kind of towering over her, right? And she is cussing me out day one, and I'm doing that. I'm trying not to laugh, bro. Worst mistake ever.
Oh, no.
You know, but it, you know, and then it takes about a week to really kind of, okay, we're in this. Heads are shaved or whatever, and then it's in those moments where you start to interact with people that you would never interact with your entire life, because we all look the same.
Yeah.
Same uniform, bald head, we're towing the line, we're working together.
Yep.
And then my military career goes off from there. But that type of thing, like, you just don't get that today, right? So I can't instill that into my kids, you know? So the fear thing is where I'm going with this whole story. Is if my son came home tomorrow and said, by the way, I signed up for Air Force,
X.
Marines, Army, whatever, I would be terrified.
You know
'Cause
what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always told them, because they would always ask me about my military background, and like, if they were going to do it, what would they do? Or what do I think they should do? And I was always like, well, find the path of least resistance if you're going to do it. And do something that doesn't require you to carry a weapon every day. Because I love the military in that you can literally, you get yourself through boot camp. And I think this goes along with all branches. There's obviously different levels to all this stuff.
Sure.
But you could totally go into the military and do a very specific job that lifts you up for the civilian world in amazing ways. So I've always been, you know, a proponent of military service is great for a lot of young people if you don't know what you want to do. It's only at most 4 years of your life, which to a young person seems like an eternity.
Yeah.
But what you get in return, if you decide that you just want to be done after your first 4 years or whatever, it just opens so many doors. It really helps shape character.
That's awesome.
But,
That is awesome. Yeah, it seems like, you know, you can tell by like your reflection on it that it's like, it's not like a surface thing. It's, you know, you're like, you know the weight of it, you know, because you were in it, you were in the trenches, so to speak. So when you have that intimate connection with it, you're like, I know what this means. You know?
Wild. Would you think of I knew dudes that did show me their driver's license, like when I was done, like I went to my first base of duty and I'm getting to know people, and they'd be like, hey, look, I had hair down to here, you know, and it's like you become friends with people that you would never have been friends. I have a buddy today, Brian Jewers. Shout out to Brian. He lives in Boston. That's where he's from, and we were wild when we were in the service together, man. I mean, it was a different time in my life for sure. But he owns his own medical office. I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but I believe he's a nurse practitioner now.
Okay.
So, and then his wife does some stuff in counseling and whatever. So, but what I'm getting at is I haven't physically seen him or spoken to him verbally in over 20 plus years, but we talk on Instagram. You know, he'll send me, it's as if, you know, his life has gone on this completely different path than what we were on in the service, much like mine.
Yeah.
And the ability that this little device allows, that I would have had to have, like, sat down, wrote a letter, went to the post office, mailed it, and waited
Stamp.
forever for him to get it and read it,
Yeah.
and then maybe write me back. It
Yeah.
could take months to communicate.
Yeah.
Where if I really want to say something to him, even if I'm just being a little snarky, I can send it to him on Instagram.
Right.
Which is wild.
But you've kept that relationship up.
Yeah, it's
which is
weird
awesome.
too, though, because
Yeah.
we went through this period where none of us talked to each other, and then with the advent, because when I got out of the service, there was still no like real social media. I mean, I think I was on MySpace for years after I got out of the service, and then Facebook came along or whatever. So when you're trying to make those connections, and
Yeah.
it was only until I think Instagram came along that some of these older people or older friendships that I had from the service found their way back. Like, you literally be like, oh, I wonder what, he's on Instagram. Like,
right.
Hey, let's start.
Yeah, no kidding.
How wild is that?
It is wild. It is wild.
You couldn't have done that 20 years ago.
Yep. Well, and you made the comment how, you know, you haven't really had a face-to-face with him.
Yeah.
You said 20-some years?
Oh,
right?
yeah.
One of my closest friends, he was in my wedding, I was in his wedding. Through his work, he ended up moving to Detroit, and he's down there now with his family. We can't interact like we used to. Like, we grew up riding snowmobiles and hanging out. I mean, I basically lived at his parents' house, and he lived at my house. But as time goes on, you get older, right? Some of those relationships, especially if they move away, fall apart. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like you lose connection and whatever. It's funny that you said that, because he and I will go months, maybe not talk, maybe not connect at all. But the second one of us has something going on in our life, or the second we think of something that we're like, I got to call him, right? You pick up
Right where
you left off.
Yeah, that
is
wild. That
wild.
is such a man thing.
Oh my gosh.
I don't really, honestly, I don't believe women are like that.
I don't get it.
I don't get it either, but it is one of those things where, yeah, if pick one of my friends, if I didn't see them, if something happened, they had to move or whatever, for whatever reason, we just didn't connect.
Yeah.
And then if I happen to walk into a bar and there he is, it's like,
hey man,
how's it going?
What's up?
Yeah.
Hey, what you been? How's the kids? How's the wife? You know, and then you're just chumming. It clicks, you know,
Yeah.
and I love that. I mean, I absolutely love it. But I feel guilty. Like, there's times where, man, I haven't talked to this dude for like ever, you know? Like, oh man. But you know, if you reach out to him, it's like, hey man, that's cool. You know, you're busy. You know, it's like, there's no resentment there. There's no problem with it. It's just like, hey, we're busy, you know? And it's, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I love that.
well, my guy, we're a solid hour and a half into this.
All right.
So I think we could shut it down, but we should do this again.
Okay.
This was really good. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah. Oh man, I really appreciate it. I appreciate you asking me to come on. That's awesome.
I think your parents are going to have a good time watching
So,
it.
all
We didn't
right.
swear. I didn't swear.